A human jawbone was found, and the trail it led police down was terrifying. When a golden retriever returned from the woods with something in its mouth, the family assumed it was just another stick or animal bone. But when 12-year-old Emma Torres looked closer at what her dog Buddy had brought home, she screamed. What started as an ordinary Saturday afternoon hike would lead investigators down a path so disturbing that it would expose a killer who had been operating undetected for over 15 years, claiming victims across 4 states. It was October 15, 2022, a crisp autumn afternoon in Willow Creek, a small town nestled in the Cascade Mountains of Washington state. The Torres family, David, his wife Jennifer, and their daughter Emma, had decided to take advantage of the beautiful weather to hike one of their favorite trails in the Cascade Ridge Forest. Buddy, their 3-year-old golden retriever, bounded ahead on the trail as he always did, disappearing into the underbrush and returning periodically to check on his family. About 2 miles into their hike, Buddy vanished into a dense section of forest off the main trail. The Torres family continued walking, expecting him to catch up as usual. When Buddy emerged 10 minutes later, he was carrying something in his mouth, trotting proudly with his find as dogs often do when they discover interesting objects in the woods. David called Buddy over, ready to take away whatever stick or bone the dog had found. But as Buddy dropped his prize at David's feet, Jennifer gasped. Even from several feet away, she could tell this wasn't a deer bone or any other animal remains she had seen before. The shape was unmistakably human, a jawbone with several teeth still attached, weathered by time but clearly identifiable. Emma, curious about what had caused her mother's reaction, walked over to look. When she saw what Buddy had brought them, she let out a scream that echoed through the quiet forest. David immediately pulled out his cell phone, but they were too deep in the forest to get a signal. He carefully marked the location on his GPS, took several photos with his phone for later reference, and the family quickly made their way back to the trailhead, leaving the jawbone exactly where Buddy had dropped it. Within an hour, the Cascade County Sheriff's Department had been notified. Deputy Sheriff Michael Chen was the first to respond, meeting the Torres family at the trailhead parking lot. David showed him the photos on his phone and provided the GPS coordinates. Chen immediately called for backup and contacted Detective Sarah Martinez, the department's lead investigator for major crimes. Detective Martinez arrived with a team of forensic specialists and search and rescue personnel trained in evidence recovery. The Torres family led them back to the location where Buddy had dropped the jawbone, and from there, Buddy led the team to the area where he had originally found it. The spot was approximately 30 yards off the main trail, in a heavily wooded area with thick underbrush. What the search team found in that location would haunt them for years to come. Partially concealed beneath leaves, fallen branches, and forest debris were additional human remains. Not just from one person, but scattered skeletal remains that preliminary examination suggested belonged to multiple individuals. Detective Martinez immediately secured the scene and called for additional resources. This was no longer a single death investigation. This was potentially a serial killer's dumping ground. Over the next 72 hours, forensic teams meticulously searched a 1-mile radius around the initial discovery site. They established a grid pattern and examined every square foot of forest floor. The remains they recovered were shocking in scope. Skeletal remains from at least 7 different individuals were found, all in various states of decomposition, suggesting the bodies had been left there over a period of many years. The jawbone that Buddy had originally found became evidence item number 1. Dr. Patricia Chen, the state forensic anthropologist brought in to examine the remains, determined that the jawbone belonged to a young woman, likely between 20 and 25 years old at the time of death. Dental records would be crucial for identification, and the teeth still attached to the jawbone were in good enough condition to provide that identification. Dr. Chen's analysis of all the recovered remains painted a disturbing picture. All 7 victims appeared to be young women, ranging in age from late teens to early 30s. The skeletal analysis suggested they had died at different times, with the oldest remains having been in the forest for approximately 15 years, while the most recent appeared to have been there for about 2 years. This indicated a serial killer who had been active for over a decade, using this remote forest location to dispose of victims. But it was the specific nature of the remains that revealed the killer's methodology and led to the breakthrough in the case. Each victim showed similar skeletal trauma, particularly damage to the hyoid bone in the neck, indicating strangulation. Additionally, several of the skulls showed evidence of blunt force trauma, suggesting the victims had been knocked unconscious before being strangled. The killer had a pattern, a method, a signature. Detective Martinez assembled a task force drawing resources from the Washington State Police, the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, and forensic experts from across the region. They began the painstaking process of identifying the victims through dental records, DNA analysis, and cross-referencing with missing person reports. The first identification came within a week. The jawbone that Buddy had found belonged to Jessica Lauren Miller, age 23, who had been reported missing from Seattle in July 2019. Jessica had been a nursing student at the University of Washington, last seen leaving her shift at a hospital where she worked part-time. Her car had been found abandoned in a grocery store parking lot 3 days after she disappeared. Despite extensive investigation, no leads had ever developed in her case. As more identities were confirmed through dental records and DNA, a pattern began to emerge that made the investigators' blood run cold. All 7 victims had been young women who worked in healthcare or were studying to enter healthcare professions. 5 were nurses or nursing students, 1 was a medical assistant, and 1 was studying to become a physician's assistant. They had disappeared from different cities across Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana over a 15-year period, and until now, no one had connected their cases. The geographical spread of the disappearances had prevented law enforcement from recognizing a serial pattern. Each jurisdiction had investigated their missing person case independently, and the victims had different enough backgrounds that the similarities in their professions hadn't been flagged. But now, with all 7 victims discovered in one location, the pattern was undeniable. FBI Special Agent Robert Torres, no relation to the family who had made the discovery, led the behavioral analysis. "We're looking for someone who has a specific fixation on healthcare workers," he explained to the task force. "This isn't random. The killer is selecting victims based on their profession or career path. That suggests the killer either works in healthcare, has regular contact with healthcare facilities, or has some personal grievance related to medical care." The geographical distribution of where the victims had disappeared was also significant. The cities formed a rough circle around the Cascade Ridge Forest, with the furthest disappearance about 200 miles away. This suggested someone who traveled regularly through the region, possibly for work, and knew the area well enough to know about the remote location in the forest. Detective Martinez's team began investigating anyone who fit the profile. Someone who traveled regularly through the region, had connection to healthcare facilities, and had been in the area during the time periods when the victims disappeared. They looked at medical equipment salespeople, pharmaceutical representatives, traveling nurses, insurance adjusters who visited healthcare facilities, and any other profession that might provide the necessary access and mobility. The break in the case came from an unexpected source. Dr. Chen, the forensic anthropologist, noticed something unusual while examining one of the skulls. There were marks on the bone that appeared to be from a medical instrument, specifically the type of marks that might be made during an autopsy or medical examination. But these marks were perimortem, meaning they had been made around the time of death, not afterward by animals or decomposition. "Someone with medical knowledge handled these remains," Dr. Chen told the investigative team. "These marks suggest someone who has training in anatomy, who knows how to examine skeletal structure. This isn't just a killer with a fixation on healthcare workers. This might be someone with actual medical training." This insight dramatically narrowed the suspect pool. The task force began focusing specifically on individuals with medical training who traveled regularly through the four-state region. They cross-referenced lists of doctors, nurses, medical examiners, and anyone else with anatomical training against vehicle registrations, travel records, and employment histories. Detective Martinez was reviewing the list of potential suspects when one name caught her attention. Dr. Richard Hammond, age 47, a traveling medical examiner who provided services to small counties that couldn't afford full-time forensic staff. Hammond had been licensed to practice in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. He traveled constantly between small towns, performing autopsies and death investigations for counties throughout the region. Hammond's travel records over the past 15 years placed him in proximity to 6 of the 7 cities where victims had disappeared, during the time frames of their disappearances. He had grown up in a small town just 20 miles from the Cascade Ridge Forest and had hiked those trails extensively as a teenager and young adult. He would have known about the remote areas where bodies could be hidden. But having a suspect who fit the profile wasn't enough. They needed evidence linking Hammond to the victims or the crime scenes. Detective Martinez obtained a warrant for Hammond's home, vehicle, and office. The search was conducted simultaneously across all 3 locations on a Tuesday morning in November 2022. What they found in Hammond's home office was beyond disturbing. In a locked filing cabinet in his basement, investigators discovered what could only be described as a trophy collection. 7 manila folders, each labeled with initials and dates. Inside each folder were personal items: driver's licenses, student ID cards, jewelry, and most chillingly, photographs. The photographs showed the victims, clearly taken shortly before or after their deaths. The initials and dates on the folders matched the 7 victims whose remains had been found in the forest. But the folders contained something else that confirmed Hammond's guilt beyond any doubt: detailed notes describing each victim's death. Hammond had documented the entire process, from how he had selected each victim, to how he had approached them, to the methods he had used to subdue, transport, and kill them. He had written about their final moments with clinical detachment, describing their deaths as if they were medical procedures he was performing. Hammond had used his position as a medical examiner to identify and stalk his victims. When he traveled to different facilities for work, he would observe the healthcare workers, selecting women who fit his preferred victim type: young, professional, ambitious, kind. He would learn their routines, their schedules, their habits. Then, when the opportunity arose, he would approach them, often posing as someone who needed medical help or information. His medical training gave him knowledge of how to subdue victims using pressure points and techniques that would leave minimal evidence. His anatomical knowledge helped him understand exactly how much force was needed to render someone unconscious without killing them immediately. He strangled his victims in a way that he believed left minimal forensic evidence, and his knowledge of decomposition and forensics helped him select a disposal site where he thought remains would never be found or would be too degraded to provide useful evidence. The files revealed that Hammond had started killing in 2007, with his first victim being Amanda Peterson, a 26-year-old emergency room nurse from Spokane. He had continued killing at irregular intervals, sometimes waiting 2 or 3 years between victims. This irregular pattern had helped him avoid detection, as law enforcement agencies look for patterns and timelines when identifying serial offenders. Hammond was arrested at his office while conducting an autopsy. The irony of a medical examiner who spent his days determining how others had died, being arrested for committing the very crimes he was trained to investigate, was not lost on the arresting officers. Detective Martinez herself made the arrest, reading Hammond his rights while he stood in his scrubs, his hands still gloved from the procedure he had been performing. During his initial interview, Hammond said nothing, refusing to speak without his attorney present. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. The photographs, the personal items belonging to the victims, his own detailed notes documenting the murders, his travel records placing him near the disappearance sites, and his deep knowledge of the area where the remains were found all combined to create an ironclad case. Hammond's attorney tried to argue that someone had planted the evidence in Hammond's home, that it was impossible for a respected medical professional to have committed these crimes. But the prosecution had forensic evidence as well. DNA analysis of the personal items in Hammond's possession matched the victims'. More damning still, DNA from several of the victims was found in Hammond's vehicle, despite his attempts to clean it. Luminol testing revealed blood residue in his trunk that matched 2 of the victims. The trial began 8 months after Hammond's arrest. The prosecution presented their case methodically, building a timeline of each victim's disappearance and death, showing how Hammond's travel schedule intersected with each one. They presented the physical evidence from Hammond's home, the forensic evidence from his vehicle, and the skeletal analysis showing the killer's medical knowledge. The most powerful testimony came from family members of the victims. Jessica Miller's mother, Carol Miller, testified about the 3 years of not knowing what had happened to her daughter. "Every day was torture," she told the jury, tears streaming down her face. "Every time the phone rang, I hoped it would be Jessica calling to say she was okay. Every knock on the door, I thought maybe she had come home. But she never did. And now I know why. This man, this doctor who was supposed to help people, who was supposed to dedicate his life to understanding death and bringing justice to victims, he was the one creating victims. He was the monster we were supposed to trust." The defense tried to paint Hammond as a dedicated professional who had been framed, but they couldn't overcome the mountain of evidence. The prosecution also presented evidence of Hammond's history that suggested warning signs had been missed. During medical school, he had been reported by fellow students for making inappropriate comments about female classmates. During his residency, 2 nurses had filed complaints about his behavior, describing him as cold and showing inappropriate curiosity about their personal lives. These complaints had been dismissed at the time, but in hindsight, they showed a pattern of concerning behavior. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning their verdict: guilty on all counts. 7 counts of first-degree murder, 7 counts of kidnapping, and multiple other charges related to the disposal of remains and the possession of evidence. The judge sentenced Hammond to 7 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life in prison. But the impact of Hammond's crimes extended far beyond the 7 identified victims. The task force investigating his case discovered evidence in his files suggesting there might be additional victims whose remains had not yet been found. References to other women, other dates, other locations. The investigation is ongoing, with teams searching other areas Hammond had access to, looking for more evidence of his crimes. The families of the victims have formed a support network, helping each other process the trauma of losing their loved ones to such senseless violence. They have also become advocates for better communication between law enforcement agencies, arguing that if the disappearances had been recognized as connected earlier, lives might have been saved. The Cascade Ridge Forest, once a peaceful hiking destination, now carries a darker reputation. The area where the remains were found has been marked, and a memorial has been placed there to honor the 7 identified victims: Jessica Miller, Amanda Peterson, Rebecca Chong, Lisa Davidson, Jennifer Morrison, Nicole Torres, and Samantha White. 7 young women who dedicated their lives to helping others, whose own lives were taken by someone they might have once tried to help. Emma Torres, the 12-year-old girl whose scream in the forest that October afternoon started the investigation, has struggled with what she witnessed. Her parents have provided her with counseling, helping her process the traumatic discovery. But Emma has also found purpose in what happened. She has spoken at school assemblies about the importance of trusting your instincts and reporting suspicious findings, and she has raised money for the memorial in the forest. Buddy, the golden retriever who found the original Jawbone, became something of a local celebrity, though his family shields him from too much attention. Dog trainers and forensic specialists have studied Buddy's behavior, noting that dogs often have an instinct for finding remains. Some law enforcement agencies have reached out to the Torres family about potentially training Buddy for search and rescue work, though the family has declined, wanting to keep Buddy as simply their beloved pet. Detective Martinez considers the case the most significant and disturbing of her career. What made this so terrifying wasn't just that Hammond killed 7 women, she reflects. It was that he did it while hiding in plain sight. He was a medical examiner, someone communities trusted to seek truth and justice for the dead. He used that position, that trust, that knowledge, to prey on women who had dedicated their lives to caring for others. That betrayal of professional ethics, that perversion of medical knowledge, makes this case uniquely horrifying. The case has also led to reforms in how medical examiners and forensic professionals are monitored and evaluated. New protocols require more extensive background checks, regular psychological evaluations, and peer review of behavior. The medical community has had to grapple with the uncomfortable reality that one of their own used his training and position to commit horrific crimes. Dr. Patricia Chen, the forensic anthropologist who analyzed the remains, has presented the case at multiple professional conferences, using it as an example of how forensic science can identify serial offenders even years after their crimes. The skeletal evidence, the pattern of trauma, the geographical distribution of remains, all combine to paint a picture of a serial killer operating over more than a decade. FBI Special Agent Torres has incorporated the case into training materials for the Behavioral Analysis Unit, using it to teach new profilers about the dangers of missing patterns when crimes occur across multiple jurisdictions. Serial killers count on geographical boundaries to hide their patterns, he explains in his lectures. They know that if they spread their crimes across different cities, different counties, different states, the chances of someone connecting the cases drops dramatically. We need to be better at sharing information and recognizing patterns that cross jurisdictional lines. The small town of Willow Creek has been forever changed by the case. The community has had to reconcile the fact that their peaceful forests concealed such horror for so many years. Local hiking groups now organize regular trail maintenance and monitoring, partly as a practical service but partly as a way of reclaiming the forest from the darkness of what happened there. The 7 families continued to seek closure. For some, the trial and conviction brought a measure of peace, a sense that justice had been served. For others, the pain remains raw, the loss of their daughters, sisters, and friends, an open wound that may never fully heal. They gather annually at the memorial in the forest, sharing memories of their loved ones and supporting each other through their grief. Richard Hammond sits in maximum security prison, serving his 7 consecutive life sentences. He has given no interviews, made no statements, shown no remorse. His attorney has filed multiple appeals, all of which have been denied. He will die in prison, a fate many believe is too kind for someone who showed no mercy to his victims. The investigation into possible additional victims continues. Forensic teams have searched 3 other locations based on clues from Hammond's files, but so far, no additional remains have been found. The task force remains active, following every lead, examining every piece of evidence, determined to find answers for any other families whose loved ones might have fallen victim to Hammond's crimes. The jawbone that started it all, carefully preserved as evidence, stands as a silent testament to the power of persistence and truth. Against all odds, despite being left in a remote forest, despite years of decomposition, despite a killer's attempts to hide his crimes, that single piece of bone led investigators to uncover one of the most prolific serial killers in the Pacific Northwest's history. Sometimes horror hides in the most unexpected places. Sometimes evil wears a white coat and carries the credentials of someone sworn to help others. And sometimes an ordinary family hike and a dog's instinct to retrieve interesting objects can uncover secrets that have been buried for years, bringing justice to victims who had been forgotten by everyone except the families who never stopped searching for answers. What do you think? Would you have had the courage to report what you found if you were in the Torres family's position? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories that reveal the darkness that sometimes lurks just beyond the peaceful surface of everyday life.